The way to perfection is narrow and steep.
The bypaths are many.
The pitfalls are deep.
By theory alone, many think to arrive. Here's one who could teach them if he were alive. A philosopher stepped into a boat. The river to cross would he. So learned was he thought no man could be half so clever as he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he.
To the boatman he said,
Good man, pray tell of the German philosophers three, Schopenhauer, Hegel, and weighty Kant, whom you deem the wisest to be.
Please excuse me, sir.
the boatman said,
I've not read your philosophers three. All day I'm obliged to ply these oars to support my family and me.
Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he.
In that case, my good man, your wretched life is as good as a quarter lost. Why, without the writings of those three men, not a shelf of books would I trust.
Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he.
Now then tell me, good man,
the scholar said,
have you studied the Frenchman Descartes?
I've told you before,
the other cried,
I'm unschooled. Hard work is my art.
Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he.
Hard work, what a waste! Sad, foolish man, half your life has been thrown away. Yet, still a fragment might be redeemed. Memorize one theory a day.
Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Of a sudden a storm with raging might did lash that river to foam. Like a drifting paddle they tossed their boat till it seemed they'd never get home. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he.
then the boatman cried,
My learned sir, our chances are growing dim. 2 questions you've put me so far this trip. Now I'll ask you one. Can you swim?
Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he.
I can't swim a stroke!
the philosopher cried, as he clung in despair to an oar.
Then the whole of your life is lost, my friend. You'll not need those books anymore.
Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. The boatman regrets to say his fare never reached the opposite bank. All that ponderous learning inside his head gave him weight, you see, and he sank. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a weighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his book so, such a weighty scholar was he. La 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 la.
Good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you to Sunday service on this beautiful Labor Day weekend. For those who don't know us, my name is Nayaswami Anandi. This is Nayaswami Bharat. We especially want to welcome our guests and visitors and those who are joining us online. And today is the birthday of Nayaswami Bharat. So, if you would just take a moment and just focus at your spiritual eye and just send him a little burst of light and blessing for his birthday. Thank you. Thank you. We'll begin this morning with reading from a passage from a book called Rays of the One Light that are commentaries comparing the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Ananda. And this week's reading is called Who Are the True Christians? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ said in chapter 10 of the Gospel of St. John, "All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them." Many Christians, not surprisingly, quote this saying in condemnation of other spiritual teachers, not only the Old Testament prophets, but also Buddha, Krishna, and others who lived before Jesus, as well as, by inference, any who came after him. Yet Jesus himself said in St. Matthew chapter 5, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Nowhere do we find Jesus condemning or even gently criticizing other spiritual masters. His criticisms were reserved for worldly attitudes and for those hypocritical Pharisees who had allowed religion to become, for them, a pretense. Paramahansa Yogananda explained that the expression, "all that ever came before me," referred to those spiritual teachers who placed their egos and their self-importance ahead of the Christ consciousness, in the sense of drawing people's devotion to themselves and not offering it where alone it truly belongs, to God. Yogananda himself was very firm in this regard. For example, he never spoke of anyone as his disciple. Instead, he always insisted, they are God's disciple. God is the Guru, not I. Ego is a way station on the soul's journey toward enlightenment. The soul is first trapped in lower bodily forms. Slowly it evolves to the human level, at which point self-consciousness appears. Only in human form can self-consciousness transcend material form altogether, including the lower identity of ego consciousness, and discover the true divine self within. Self-consciousness manifested as ego is an incentive to deliberate self-development. Later in this process of development, however, the ego becomes an obstruction. Inevitably, new spiritual aspirants do not emerge effortlessly from the vortex of ego consciousness. Desire must be offered up resolutely and ever more wholeheartedly on the altar of infinity. It is a gradual process, and few, even among those who seek to help others, are free of ego. If, however, their motive in teaching is not to serve, but to be served, they deserve a severe reprimand, as Jesus gave them. For their direction of development is no longer upward, but downward. In the name of giving up desires, they are creating new ones. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter, desire obscures even the wisdom of the wise. Their relentless foe it is, a flame never quenched. Intellect, mind, and senses, these combined are referred to as the seat of desire. Excuse me. Desire through them deludes and eclipses the discrimination of the embodied soul. O Arjuna, discipline your senses, and having done so, work to destroy desire, annihilator of wisdom and of self-realization. Give God the credit for everything you do. See Him as the true doer. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
I'd like to read from Whispers from Eternity, a book of mystical poems by Paramahansa Yogananda. Thou master piper, blow thy music through the reed of all religions, so often broken by sectarian selfishness, and bring forth thy one theme of truth. Dress the divine melody with many golden chords, showing the richness of thy spirit. And, O Master Piper, gather together from all the highways and byways of truth's numerous expressions all the uncompleted songs of lonely hearts seeking attunement with thee, and let them flow into complete melodies of joy through the love-playing flute of life. O my silent-tuned radio mind, I listen daily for thy thrilling, anciently familiar flute notes. I tried to tune into them, but thou seemst so far, far away, and at first the busy static of restlessness crackled in my silence. Then at last, however, with a few fine, carefully touches of concentration, I heard a soft rustling sound, as if on wings of space, and suddenly I heard thee piping softly, and then more loudly, and ever more loudly, with a swelling chorus of earth's goodness and the latent nobility in all hearts. Today I'd like to talk about who are the true Christians. In 1985, a lot of members of the community and people living beyond the village went with Swami Kriyananda for a pilgrim to the Holy Land. And at one point, every pilgrim goes to the River Jordan. And they have quite a formal scene there where you can get your white robe, and they have little bars that go down into the river. It's a very small river. And then people follow into the river, and you can get a complete immersion baptism, not just sprinkled water on you. And so there are a lot of different spiritual groups there, and a lot of different denominations from all over the world. And when it was our turn, down in the river was Ram and Diana, and they grew up Baptists, and they were the full immersion Baptists. And so they were in the water, and they were singing, See the Baby Jesus, lying in the manger. And we would walk in, and then they would dunk us in the water. And then as we would walk out, there was Swami Kriyananda, and he would bless us at the spiritual eye. And then we would kind of go back over, kind of behind the group, and all the other denominations. It was a real kind of communal thing where everybody was so excited about going into the Jordan River that everybody is really for everybody. And so they would just ask, now, what denomination are you? Because they couldn't put all the pieces together. But I was thinking about today's topic. And you know, when we operate by belief, we're operating by opinions, aren't we? And they're all different. And it's only through direct experience that we have unity and harmony with truth, because it's more about and in God rather than about God. As I was meditating this morning, this image flashed in my mind about a mountain. Before you climb the mountain, you talk about what's the best way up the mountain, what should you take, what kind of food should you eat, and there's a lot of different thoughts on it, most of them right, and it's a matter of taste. But once people are up on top of the mountain, they aren't talking about the gear or the different routes. They're just immersed in the vast blue sky and the feeling exaltation of the experience. And it's all about being in the experience. And as a soul journeys higher and higher in self-realization, it's all about that experience. It's a sign of spiritual maturity that when you take great delight in the expansive openness in other people and their sense of universal love that they have. And more, we just feel that the world is made from love and is an expression of God's love for us. And with God's love, we channel and bless other people in that way. And it's all about God. It's not about our opinions of God. When Swami Kriyananda's mother passed away in the Bay Area, town of Atherton, there was a service there. And at one point during the service, there were a lot of Ananda members there. And the pastor, the priest, said that only Christians should do this ritual that was part of the ceremony. And so there were some Ananda members thinking, well, we aren't this kind of Christian, so they didn't do the ritual. But Swami told everyone afterwards, don't let anyone define for you what Christianity is, because it's just all, about their type of Christianity, and it's just a thought form. Jesus, according to our teachings, as we know, appeared to Babaji and said, send an emissary to the West. And that emissary was Paramahansa Yogananda. And Yogananda was once visiting a monastery, a Catholic monastery in St. Louis. And I'm not sure what year it was, if it was the 30s or perhaps the 40s, but if you can imagine way back then, it's probably before most of our time, but if a long-haired man with an orange robe coming into the monastery and people not knowing what to do, and that was the reaction of the monks there. And there was a lot of kind of chaos. But the abbot was a very saintly man, and he had seen Yogananda in his meditation. And he came out and he said, oh, man of God, I'm glad you're here. And he welcomed him, because with the saints, there's no differences, because they're in that consciousness. I had a chance to visit Mount Athos. It's a peninsula in Greece. And it's where a lot of the Desert Fathers went after they were pushed out of Egypt with the Muslim expansion. And one of the saintly monks there, it was really a special place. It's wilderness, essentially. There are 20 different monasteries and different Orthodox ones. And he told me, there's only one rule in Mount Athos, and that's to live in the consciousness of God. And since the 13th century, we've all gotten along. And so, it's... the getting into differences just doesn't help, does it? There's Saint Paul. He talked about how we're all adopted sons of Christ, and there's Christian theologians. They talk about there's a difference between us and Jesus, but in Teresa of Avila, she merged with the formless Christ. And went beyond mental visualizations as she was being coached to do. They made an exception for her. And they've always made an exception for the saints. But tradition-wise, it's not something that you do. But what St. Paul said, that we're adopted sons until the divine life flows through us. And that's it's a phrase that Yogananda frequently said over and over again, to those that received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons and daughters of God. And I was thinking about that and what he had said, and a statement that Swami Kriyananda said when he was with us, that he said that I can no longer tell the difference between where Kriyananda ends and Yogananda begins. He was so immersed in Yogananda, his consciousness, that there wasn't any difference. And the true disciple is one who attains the Guru's consciousness. It's not one who believes or thinks they're right, but has that consciousness in themselves. Now, what keeps us from that consciousness? Swami Kriyananda in the Gita, he talks about what keeps the ego going life after life, and he said even yuga after yuga, and for millions of lives. And he said it's one simple thing, and it's desire. And a master's energy comes from the back of the brain, the medulla oblongata, and where Jesus called it the mouth of God, as we know. And that cosmic energy goes straight to the spiritual eye, because a master is just free in God and doesn't have any desires. But for most of us, that energy through desires, it pulls that energy down into the spine. And the desires create a vortex and that traps the energy, and then the energy can no longer flow all the way up to the spiritual eye where we experience enlightenment. And so it's desire that traps us, isn't it? There was Yogananda talked about how he was driving, being driven in a car and down a street, and all of a sudden he saw this vision. And he saw all the other people that used to live here. He saw that they, of course, they were no longer there. And he said that they were very sure about life. But God said to Yogananda, I didn't create this world for people to indulge in their emotions. I created temptation to see if people would be tempted to find me, their creator. And this is the whole purpose of creation. And once we figure that out, God will come to us. But desires, as we know, they frequent us, and it's hard to get rid of all the desires at once. It's seems to be more of an immediate thing. I was meditating on that, where we're sort of aware of something that we want outside ourselves, and we can see the consequences of it if we have enough discrimination. We know it's not a good thing, and we maybe even can see it played out in our life if it's intense enough. And we offer that up. Dr. Lewis, one of the foremost disciples, the early disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda, he was admiring a car. And it was a nice big car, a new car. And Yogananda said to Dr. Lewis, "Watch your desires, doctor." And there's this example that Yogananda shared. He said that it's how cosmic consciousness is compressed into, actually he said that 1 million cubic feet of air gets compressed into 1 cubic feet of air, and he was likening it to how we compress our experience or awareness of cosmic consciousness and compress it into body consciousness. And when we have a desire for something, and the ego is defined as the ego being identified with the body, and you could say personality, what it does is it confines our experience of cosmic consciousness into a tiny portion of matter. And what's the problem with that? Yogananda was talking about Divine Mother speaking to him. She frequently did, or all the time she did, yet probably more correctly. And she was very disappointed in her human children because her body was as big as the cosmos, and and her human children were identifying themselves as just tiny little beings, but their soul consciousness was so much greater. Well, so when we are identified with something small, like I said, we're confined by that. But once the air breaks its container, it just naturally flows out into the surrounding air. And that's how our consciousness expands outward when we commune with the Om vibration or just universal love and joy. Our consciousness just expands, and we become more of who we really are. And so this is why the saints say, don't be attached. Kriyananda was talking about we could be delighted in the human touch, or we could touch the whole universe. The choice is ours. What do you choose? When you go deep into Om, you feel yourself vibrating through every atom in creation, and your consciousness just expands. And then you go even deeper into the stillness, the center of that vibrating atom, and that's where the Christ consciousness is. Swami said that you should follow the roots of movement to that stillness. And, well, that may sound like that's a really big thing, and gee, I haven't done that. But Swami Kriyananda said also, when we're doing Hong Sa, we inhale, we exhale, but there's a pause in the middle, isn't there? And he said, in that pause is the Christ consciousness. And in that stillness. And what do we do with the Hong Sa technique, where we're breathing and inhaling and exhaling? We experience more and more that pause, and we go deep into that pause, and that will lead us to that experience. And so every time we meditate, we're attuning to the Christ consciousness, aren't we? In a very, very real, tangible way. So regarding desires, sometimes they think, one could think, well, gee, this is a big thing to give up, and maybe on the beginning of the path, we think, well, gee, what do I have if I give away my desires? I don't have anything. But the teachings assure us that everything that is given to God is blessed thousandfold. And there's a beautiful story of a beggar who was standing by the road, and the king came by. And the beggar had nothing. He had just a ratty shirt and ratty pants, no shoes. And he would thought, oh, today's my good fortune. The king has come by. And so he held out both hands and was very eager to what the king would give him. And the king smiled at him, and he asked a question that the beggar had never been asked before. And the king said, what do you have to give me? And the beggar thought for a moment, oh, I have nothing. And then he remembered that he did get some rice from somebody just a little while ago, so he took 3 little grains of that rice, and then he gave it to the king. And the king blessed him, and then went on. And that when he got home, he emptied out his pockets to see how much rice he had. And he noticed he had 3 kernels of gold in place of those 3 kernels of rice that he gave to God. And so, Christ, when he came, he said, I have come so that you may live life more abundantly. What did he mean by that? Well, the mystical aspect of Christianity is that by giving up desire, by loving God, we withdraw the life force and we offer it up. Remember, our master's energy goes all the way up to the Christ center. And that life force is now concentrated, and life force is God. And so we feel more of God. We feel more our soul nature in that experience. And so more and more we realize that. I was a little while ago, I was thinking about how could the saints be just so all-consuming in their devotion and their earnestness. And we all have that, and we all try to perfect that in ourselves. But more and more, it's because you're feeling this flow with Spirit, and just how God is just so relishable, as the teachings say. We feel this joy, and nothing can touch it. And that's what leads us to give up everything that is less, because we know that our happiness doesn't lie there. I want to tell you a story about a Christian saint, one that Swami had met. He was Romanian, and many of us in the community had the good fortune to hear him speak in Grass Valley. And he... right after the communists had taken over Romania, he was a pastor, and he was attending a big gathering of the communists and church leaders, and Richard Wurmbrand stood up and proclaimed that communism and Christianity are incompatible with each other. Well, that sent him to prison, and they immediately put him into solitary confinement for 3 years. He was buried underground, 12 feet. He had no window for 3 straight years. And at one point in the silence, he heard the Holy Spirit, the Om vibration, and just so strong it was the music that he felt I could listen to for eternity. And during that time, he would compose a sermon every night or every day. He slept during the day and developed a sermon every night. And then they were in the prison with his other Christian cellmates. And there was such joy and such exaltation that they would sing praise to God. And they would use their chains as symbols because they just felt such ecstasy. Well, the guards watching this, some of them, they felt that ecstasy too. And they started singing with the Christians. And they became prisoners like the Christians. But they really weren't prisoners anymore because their consciousness was big. And then it came time to let him out. And he was warned not to preach anymore. And he said that when he got out of prison, the only colors he saw were gray and brown. That was it. And when he got outside, he was just enthralled by the greenness of the grass and the trees and the smile on the children's faces. And he wanted to come up and touch the children on the face, but he knew that people wouldn't understand an adult doing this, so he had to restrain himself. But that very day, he began preaching again. And he got sentenced back into prison for 25 years. Luckily, he didn't have to serve that whole time. He was ransomed out. But, I just thought it's such a wonderful example of Christ's admonition to love God with your heart completely. And he just had no other desire that I know of, besides just the one desire to love God. And this is what it takes to find God. But, the journey gets sweeter and more beautiful, as we all know. As we go in this direction, it's just more and more joy and more bliss is what the devotee experiences. And I know that we've experienced that too. And that's what leads us on. It's just a heavenly journey, more and more in the spirit of the Christ consciousness. And so may we all grow ever deeper in our one committed goal, and that's to find God, to love God, and to live in His consciousness, and to share His consciousness. Bless you all.
Though green summer fade and winter draw near, my Lord, in your presence I live without fear. Through tempest, through tide. The touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. The dancers will